Imagine waking up one day and finding out that Russia, yes, I'm talking about Putin's Russia, has just rolled out a red carpet for Africans. No more visas, no more bureaucratic nightmare. Just pack your bag and go. Now, this sounds like fake news, right? Well, it is not. It's 100% real. Welcome to the mind-bending story of Russia and Africa. A tale of Cold War twists, modern-day surprises, and a friendship that is rewriting the rules of global politics. Russia has just announced that it is going to come out with a list of African countries that are going to travel to Russia visa-free. Now, this is a very, very big deal. And I want to tell you why it's a big deal. And anyway, some other people are actually against this, and I'm going to bring up their concerns and tell you why they are bringing up these concerns. Before we proceed, let's go back to history. And before we touch this history that we've been talking about right now, I want you to pay attention to one word. There is a word called trends. Now, trend, that is the highest word. That is the word that has transformed humanity forever. Now, just remember this word as we go through this video. Now, human beings actually first changed when they discovered that there is a trend in something. Now, at first, our forefathers, they used to move from one place to another, finding food, hunting, and all that. But as soon as they discovered that you can plant a seed and wait for it to grow and harvest, everything changed. That is a trend. That's when communities started forming. Now villages started forming, and today we have cities and we have countries. Now, why am I telling you this thing? I'm telling you because there is a trend between the Russia and Africa relationship, and I want us to go real quick on this. Now, remember this date. In November 1884, some European countries, they organized a conference, which is, and was, popularly known as the Berlin Conference. In that conference, Russia was invited. But then, knowing the objective of that conference, because the objective was given that we are organizing this conference in order to share Africa among ourselves, Russia refused to attend that conference. Russia's refusal to participate in the Berlin Conference stipulates Russia's unique stance among European powers. It's just like you being invited into a party where they are going to share the lunch money of a particular person, and you know it, and you refuse that you're not going to take part in that party. So Russia's refusal to attend that conference was Russia's first support towards the African continent. There are many instances, but I'm just going to list just a few so that you should see the trend, since we're talking about trends. So after the Berlin Conference, all the parties that took part in the Berlin Conference had to share Africa among themselves. So Russia was not among, it stayed behind and was kind of like being very uncomfortable with what was happening because there was so much injustice about this sharing. So during that time, we saw Britain coming into Nigeria, taking Ghana, taking many other African countries. France going to Mali, Burkina Faso, Cameroon. All these countries were just doing what they could do. And so Italy also thought that they should do something. So Italy came to Africa. They actually went to Ethiopia. Since everything was going on very easily, like they did not even face resistance. They did not face much resistance. Like in Nigeria, the British did not really face much resistance. In Ghana, they didn't face much resistance, and things were just going on. These Africans actually at that time, they were not warmongers. They had just their spears for hunting and farming. That's all what they cared about. They just wanted to live life in a natural way. But the Europeans came with guns. So Italy actually knew that that's the same thing that has been going all over Africa, and it came actually to Ethiopia to seize Ethiopia from the Ethiopian people. What it never knew is that Ethiopia had links and ties with Russia. Menelik, which was the Ethiopian leader at that time, was a very brilliant military strategist. So if you look at the map, actually, the map of Ethiopia is kind of more inland than actually coastal. So he allowed the Italians to get into the hinterlands so that he can react. So when he allowed the Ethiopians, the Italians were actually going after them, and they were actually giving off land and going gradually into the interior. And when they knew that they were actually right into the heart of Ethiopia, they had to surround the Italians and come out with their real weapons. The Italians never knew that these guys had guns. They thought that they would just come with their guns from Italy and put everybody down. And because Russia gave its support to Ethiopia, Ethiopia is today the only country in Africa that was not colonized. Imagine if we had enough food countries on earth, maybe they would have prevented Africa from actually being colonized. They would have prevented many people from actually dying, because during the colonization period, many Africans lost their lives unjustly. Now, the next example I want to talk about is apartheid. In the 1960s, when the whole world gave a blind eye to the apartheid movement that was actually going on in South Africa, the Russians stood behind the South Africans and told them that, no, we are behind you. We want to support you. We want to bring justice to this land. We want to give everybody equal rights. Everybody was against them. The Europeans was against. The US was against. In fact, the South Africans were left with themselves. So Russia actually came in support for the South Africans, and that's how apartheid ended. I want to say something. I want to just say something. You know, when you commit a crime, you are sent to prison. And while in prison, if you commit another crime, you are further isolated. What does this tell us? This actually tells us that the highest punishment that you can give to a human being is not physical punishment, but it is isolation, separation. Look at it. The fact that no African country can actually have visa-free access to Europe is some kind of isolation, is another way of isolating Africa. And Russia is doing the opposite. A consistent trend. From my research, I found that 0%, no country on the African mainland has free visa entry into Europe. But then when you do research, you discover that about 16% of Asian countries have visa-free entry into Europe. About 50% of South American countries have visa entry into Europe. What is happening? Why are they blocking Africa from entering to Europe? These same countries that colonized Africa.
Patrick doesn't need 35 visas.
No.
But, so which means you have a freer movement than myself in Africa.
Yeah.
But Russia alone already accepts many African countries. I'm going to give you a list of other African countries that can go to Russia visa-free as we go through this video. Now, forget about that. It doesn't mean that people don't travel to Europe. People travel actually to Europe. Many Africans actually travel to Europe. But then, when we go there again, Africa still has the highest level of rejection when it comes to visa applications. Now, 13% of our Asian applicants to Europe are rejected. 30% of visa applicants from Africa are rejected, which is actually the highest in the world. And it is worth noting that the European Union is actually making this to be business. This 30% amounts to about 700,000 rejections, which is equivalent to about 54.2 million euros. Now, this is big business. The European Union now sees this as a very big source of income that is actually extracting from Africans. So why am I going down to history? I'm going down to history so that we should see a historic support that Russia gave to Africa. And today, Russia is still announcing that it is granting visa-free entry for Africans into Russia. Now, I want to tell you why this is a big deal. I actually thought that it's not a big deal. I mean, visa-free, that's what I thought. But when I decided to, I said, let me check the numbers. I was surprised. I was actually shocked. So currently, there are some countries in Africa that already have the visa-free entry into Russia. We are talking about Angola, Mauritius, Seychelles, Morocco, and Malawi. Russia has promised that it's going to add 9 more countries to this list. Now, this actually makes a very big deal, taking into consideration the trend that we have seen. It is a constant trend of supporting the African people. That's why we talked about trend earlier on. So Russia and Africa actually have certain things in common. I know many people will be asking that, but what are they going to be discussing? What will be the discussion all about? How these people are very different. No, Russia and Africa actually have several things in common. Now, one of these things that they have in common, like father, mother relationship and all that kind of stuff. They have the same views. The Russians have the same views like the Africans. They don't even want to hear about it. So they are actually on the same page on that. So culturally, there are some similar things. And then also, Africans like to live in the community, same as Russians. In Africa, if you move into a neighborhood, you cannot just come, put your things and start living there. It doesn't work like that. In Africa, what you do is when you are moving into a neighborhood, when you get in, you pack your things, you go out to the streets and you introduce yourself to your neighbors. You say, hey, I'm the new guy on the block. That's the same culture that the Russians have, which is actually not the same all over the world. There are many regions in the world that see this as a shock. How can you get to a place where you're in a place and you start greeting people, you start talking about yourself to people, introduce yourself to people? In Africa, it's normal. In Russia, it's also normal. In other places, it's not. So these are some similarities that these cultures have already. This is not to say that everything is just rosy. There are certain aspects that the Russians also are very different. Like, you know how Russians are very tough. You know how these guys get into cold water. These guys can get into cold water. Like there's one video about Vladimir Putin. He got into ice cold water. No, in Africa we cannot do that kind of thing. I mean, it is scary to see an African getting into cold water. We keep a distance. First of all, Africa is first of all warm. The fact that Africans travel to Russia or travel to Scandinavian countries where it's cold is already something. Getting an extra mile of getting into cold water, it's not a thing. It's not really our thing. It's not really the African thing. This is one part where there is a very big difference between the Russians and the Africans. That's a stark difference. I mean, on one side, a typical African will never enter into that kind of cold water. For what? What is the benefit? You not enter in that kind of water, no matter how much you pay him. He's not going to go there. But Russians do this like every day. So this is going to be an opportunity where there is going to be an exchange of cultural values. The Russian government is actually bringing lots of infrastructural development to Africa. I told you about trends. Everything is just like positive. The Russian government is actually bringing infrastructural development in Africa. When I talk about infrastructure in this sense, the Russians are actually experts in nuclear energy. I'm not talking about that kind of nuclear that makes kaboom. No, we're talking about the nuclear energy that is going to supply much needed energy in Africa. Africa actually has lots of potentials to develop hydroelectricity, but it has not really been successful in doing that. We still have lots of problems with electrical supply and all that. In Nigeria, for example, there is a very huge project that Russians have started, and this is going to impact the Nigerian government, because the Nigerian government for over 60 years they have not been able to actually supply enough energy for the Nigerian population, and this has actually slowed the economy. So we're actually going to see a very big boost over the next few years when this mighty nuclear project is completed. So the Russians are not only bringing their cuisine, they're not only bringing their different cultures, but they're also coming with other development. The Russians are going to build nuclear energy infrastructure in Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. So for a start, and there are many other countries that have identified that they have to extend this technology there. So all these projects are not just vanity projects. They are projects that are actually creating jobs. They are going to create thousands of jobs and are also going to boost the economy of these countries. Anyone who has ever traveled to Nigeria will be familiar with frequent energy shortages, and so this is going to be a game changer. It's going to change everything in Nigeria. So Russia actually coming in this sector is going to be a game changer. Again, we see the trends. Russia coming in at very strategic points. Now, let's talk about something very, very important. I can see some of you actually typing in the comment section furiously that we should be very careful. These things have strings attached. Yeah, international relation is quite complicated. Whenever countries do big things like this, not everyone thinks it's a good idea. Some people have worries or doubts. It's always smart to think about both sides in any situation. So let's look at some of the concerns people have about Russia's friendship with Africa. So the first concern is that people are actually thinking that Russia wants soldiers for its wars. We all know a war is going on in Ukraine, and if this kind of thing is going on, it might be the reason why some of these things are coming up, as some people are actually saying. But then, while it's true that countries often make friends for their own benefits, there is no evidence that Russia is asking for soldiers. The visa-free policy is about travel, business, and cultural exchange. It is more likely that Russia wants to do more trade and have more political friends in the world. So another concern that people always say is that they want Africa to stay in Africa and actually develop Africa, because of course, if everybody leaves, who is going to develop Africa? People have to stay back and also work towards development, because, you know, development needs people. And then if we look at the other side, while it is true that traveling can actually take people out of the continent that would otherwise help the continent in developing its industries and many other things, it is also important for these people to go out, learn new skills, and come back strong. This is the same thing I always tell people who travel out of the country. When you travel out of the country, make it your goal to come back. It's not a bad thing to travel out of the country, out of the continent. Go, yes, but make it your assignment to come back with something new. When you come back with something new, there are business opportunities in Africa more than any other part in the world. Africa is literally the world's fastest growing economy. And I'm not just making this up. These are actually facts that are in World Bank reports year in, year out. Africa has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. This literally tells you that there are lots of opportunities in Africa. More to that, according to reports, the number of millionaires in Africa is going to grow by 47% over the next 10 years. Now, this is very huge, and this is one of the largest figures if you look at it detailedly across the world. The number of millionaires in Africa is actually going to surge in the next 10 years. So you going out, learning some skills and coming back to Africa, you're going to make a very big change and you're going to make a lot of money for yourself. That does not go without actually saying that Africa imports more than 60% of its produce. So if we import all these things, if you go out, learn some of those things, learn some of those skills and produce some of those things back here in Africa, you're going to be a rich man. You're going to make a lot of money. So that is a big advantage. Traveling is not a bad thing. It depends on your intention. If you are traveling to go stay, then you probably have no impact on the continent. But if you are traveling to go refine your skills and come back to Africa and implement these skills and start up a business and do something and employ 1 or 2 or 3 people, you are actually making an impact. Yeah, there is another worry that Russia might actually take advantage of Africa because it's more powerful. It can take advantage of the relationship and actually use up Africa's natural resources. Now, there are a group of people who actually have these thoughts. So I'm just bringing out these concerns because these are concerns that people have actually raised, and I'm like trying to bring out each of the concerns and look at both sides of the coin so that we talk about it. This is a global discussion actually. Now, this is a very, very serious concern as it has happened to many countries in the past. I'm not talking about countries with Russia anyway. African countries have had this problem with most Western countries. And it's a problem that is still going on today. And Africans have actually readjusted most of their laws. They have actually made reforms to actually protect the country's resources. Many African countries are actually doing that right now. So that is not really much of a concern. The key here to take for most African countries is that they should make sure that any deal that they have with Russia should be beneficial to both parties. That is the most important thing. Some people are actually worried that a tight relationship between Africa and Russia might actually make other friends of Africa upset. For example, we have China, Europe, and the US. We all know the relationship that the US have with Russia. So Africa being too close to Russia, the US might see this as a signal and, things might not move well. So that is the point of view. But then in today's world, countries don't have to choose just one friend. Many African countries have good relationships with multiple powers. And mark you, this policy doesn't mean Africa is actually choosing Russia over the US or over Europe or over China. It's just opening another door for cooperation and exchange. You remember the relationship you had at school? International relationships are just the same. but on a very large scale, it is sometimes very, very complicated. At times, your friend might be angry that you are hanging out with another friend, but with diplomacy and many other things, we get to understand that this is not that same relationship. So what does all this mean for you? Whether you're watching from New York, from Lagos, from Abuja, from Yaoundé, from China, all this means opportunities. These are opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to exchange your preconceptions and be part of a global conversation. You see, my friends, the world is actually changing. Old alliances are shifting. New partnerships are forming. And voices shaping our future are becoming more and more diverse. This visa-free policy isn't just about travel. It's a symbol of a world that is becoming more connected, more open, and more inclusive. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. History is not something that just occurs in textbooks. It's something we are all part of every single day. Choices we make, the connections we forge, the bridges we build. These are the things that shape the world. So whether you're dreaming about St. Petersburg in Russia, or you are planning on welcoming a friend at Mombasa Beach in East Africa, remember this: every journey begins with a single step. And sometimes that step is as simple as reaching across the border, across cultures, and across preconceptions. The world is very, very vast, so let's exploit it. My name is Ashgabat, and you are watching Africa Today. And if you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, I don't know what you're waiting for. If you want more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and massage the like button. Before going, I want to thank our members for always supporting. I want to send a shout out to Mike Obi. See you in the next video. Ciao.